The Good Samaritan. Hello, everybody. I'm Parker Pruitt, and thank you for joining me on the Inseparable Podcast. Well, thanks again for joining me today on the Inseparable Podcast. I wanted to talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan in the Gospel of Luke today. The other day, I heard this parable being spoken about on Christian radio. The preacher on the radio was just kind of reading the parable itself, and I didn't really think too much of it at the time. I was at work, and so I was just kind of going about my day, listening to it. But later on that night, when I went to bed, when all the noise dies down, is usually when the Lord speaks to me clearest. And I started uh, falling back on that parable. I started thinking about that parable again, and specifically, I wanted to dive in a little deeper. I felt like Jesus was showing me something a little bit more deeper in that parable than what really initially met the ear at the time when I heard it. I've read the story several times, but and you probably have too, and probably have heard the story several times. But I want to share some of those thoughts from the Lord. But first, I want to actually read the story to you, so that way you're refreshed on that. Or if you've never read it before or heard it before, it's a beautiful story. It's just about 12 verses, so bear with me here. So Luke chapter 10, verse 25, starting in verse 25. And I'll be reading out of the NIV. It says, "On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he asked, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?' 'What is written in the law?' he replied. 'How do you read it?' He answered, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.' 'You have answered correctly,' Jesus replied. 'Do this and you will live.' But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?' In reply, Jesus said," and this is the story, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, so too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side as well. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn or a hotel, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these three," Jesus said, "do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "Well, the one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Well, the thought I had that Jesus, I think, put on my heart that night uh, when I was thinking about the parable was who exactly those people represented in the story. At face value, the whole Bible is a good story, right? It's entertaining. It's got highs and lows and twists and turns, death, life. There's a lot of stuff in there. But what I think the Lord was showing me was we have to take things a little bit deeper, right? There's deeper truths than what initially meets the eye. Sure, it's a beautiful story on its face, but when we start to really just think about it and dwell on some of these parables, some of these stories, we see there's like a lot of depth that we can get to, and a lot of stuff we can get out of it. We barely scratch the surface on some of this stuff. So we must keep this principle in mind when we're reading the Bible itself. Then oftentimes than not, there are deeper truths that need to be discovered. So, for example, 2 Timothy 2:15 tells us to study to show ourselves approved, rightly dividing the word of truth. So we must not just read the Bible, but study the Bible, study the words of Christ. And it eventually shows ourselves approved to God. So my thoughts on this particular story, on the people in this particular story, and were as follows. So the kingdom, I thought to myself, the kingdom, the kingdom is righteousness, peace, and joy, right? The kingdom is a reign, right? The reign of God, the laws of God, the reign of God, if you will. That is not going to be ushered in to our lives and into the world itself as we expect it to be. It's not going to come like you expect it to come, in other words. The kingdom isn't always going to come into the world as, through the people we expect it to come through. It doesn't always have to come through a pastor, a preacher, a songwriter, a theologian, a person at church. It could be a homeless person standing under the bridge. It could be anybody. It could be a friend at school. It could be a coworker, your boss. God can use anybody. He'll speak through anybody, right? We've already discovered that several times on this episode, or on this podcast here. So here in this story is a perfect example of that. Here we had a priest and a Levite that didn't fulfill their duty, right? Their rightful duty to go and take care of the person that was abused and beaten by the robbers and taken advantage of by those robbers. The priest and the Levite, they went to the other side of the road, and these were members of the religious community, right? These were higher ranking people in the religious community, well respected people. And in Jesus's story, while it was fictitious and made up, but they still serve a purpose. Those stories still serve a purpose, right? There's so much truth in that. Like, how many times have our clergy failed us, and our preachers? We're all just human beings, right? We all fail, but it just goes to show you that it doesn't always have to be a member of your church, or a pastor, a singer, to pass along a message. You should respect and give an ear to anybody that's willing to offer you encouragement. If somebody's encouraging you and doing something out of love, they're doing it unto Christ himself. That is his disciple, right? Just because maybe they don't believe in God, they don't think they believe in God, they're doing God's work in the earth. They are God's disciples. And that's what Jesus says in John chapter 13, verse 34 through 35, which says, "A new command I give you," Jesus says, "love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Not if you pray a certain prayer. Well, that's awesome and great and good to experience. But it's the love you show. It's how you treat one another. The golden rule: treat others how you would want to be treated. The Samaritan, which probably shouldn't have even had contact with the person, because that was the way the laws were back then, thousands of years ago, he took a chance. He or she went over and helped the person in need. So it's just offering a helping hand up to people, right? That's fulfilling the law of Christ. That's what Jesus is really looking for. That's all Jesus wants out of us, is to learn to love one another. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who the other person is. If there's an opportunity in front of you, which there is every single day, if there's a car broken down, if there's a person on the street asking for food, money, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's a friend at work that just needs help, or maybe it's a coworker you don't always get along with that maybe needs help with a task at work. Help them out. If you got the time, if you can make the time or can spare the time, try to help them out. Try to do as if you would want them to do to you, because eventually you will be that person on the other side of the coin. So those were my personal thoughts on it. But in doing some research on this parable, I found some interesting things that the early church father Origen of Alexandria had written about 150 years after Christ died. And Origen of Alexandria says in one of his writings, the priest, and this kind of goes along with the fact that like we can't just take everything at face value. There's so much more we can dig into these parables and what they represent, what they represented to first century Jews, what they represented to thousands of years before Christ even walked the earth, the people who, Moses and the prophets and David. I mean, it encompasses such a vast, array of people and things. So this is what Origen says: the priest is the law, or represents the law, meaning the law of Moses. The Levite in the story of the Good Samaritan represents the prophets: Jeremiah, Obadiah, Malachi, the prophets, both major and minor. Isaiah, for example, those Old Testament prophets. That's who the Levite in the story represented. So the Levite represented the prophets, but the Samaritan in the story represented Christ. The wounds on the person were disobedience that he took on himself. The beast is the Lord's body. The inn, or the hotel, which accepts all who wish to enter, is the church. It represents the church. So the hotel in the story is the church. The manager of the hotel, or the inn, is the head of the church, or to whom its care has been entrusted. So I just thought those were really cool parallels, that we could draw from Jesus's parable. That, like, while it's a beautiful story in and of itself, it has a deeper meaning that we can draw some very important conclusions from. That it kind of just lines up with that Old Testament, right? It kind of like completes it doesn't take away, but it completes it. So then the Samaritan is the Christ in the story, right? Jesus came down, took the beating on himself, and then picked up humanity and saved humanity, and purchased us back, bought us back with his own blood. Now you belong to him, and it's just a matter of coming to that realization now. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope you guys enjoyed this message. Please like and subscribe to this channel for more content. God bless you all. Have a great day.